Oh, we're live. Hi, Henry. Welcome to Venture with Grace.
Thank you, Grace. It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, so this is such a, I feel like hearing your story, it's like such an inspirational one. And I typically just like, I feel like, living in Silicon Valley, we always see these entrepreneurs just like, oh, on the first try. And then they just like successfully did like amazing things. Obviously, your company's amazing. And then I don't think you repetitively did anything, but like, I just feel like your story is like super inspirational. And then I really want the audience to hear it. So, you started ZoomInfo originally discovery org, and in like 2007 when you're like in your law school dorm with
Yep.
25K credit card investment. And I want to know like how, maybe if you could give the audience a little bit of background on how you started, and then how do you kind of like achieve early product market fit and like revenue traction to without like venture capital funding to kind of like keep you going with that entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah. So I founded ZoomInfo in 2007. I just finished my first year in law school. And when we founded the business, I had actually worked for a similar company when I was in college.
Mhm.
And so I saw the demand and the product market fit. And what I knew was that companies, I think just rewinding back to 2007 is like quite an exercise.
Mhm.
18 years ago, if you were a security software seller in 2007 and your territory was named accounts of the Fortune 500, you didn't know who the chief information officer was. You didn't know who was in information security. LinkedIn was barely out there at that point. And so it was a black box to try to sell into companies. Even if you were selling into, actually the way sales worked back then was I would hire a really expensive enterprise seller, and I would hire him because he had this great Rolodex that he had spent the last 15 years building up, working with other Fortune 500 information security officers or CIOs. He'd come into my business, he'd go sell to those people. There's some of that exists still today, but back then that was all of it. And so people didn't know, new entrants into sales didn't have a Rolodex to start with. And then even if you had a great Rolodex, your company didn't. And so if you wanted to do marketing outreach to those information security people in the Fortune 500, if you wanted to go broader than that or have a data asset that told you who the right people were to engage with, it just didn't exist. And so there was clear that there was product market fit in having data on your potential customers and how to reach them.
Mm.
What I think maybe the unique thing that we did to be able to achieve profitable growth in the early days was we were very tight on who we would go out and sell to. We collected only data on the information technology departments of companies, and we sold that then only to companies that sold to the information technology departments of companies. And so it was really easy to filter out, a bunch of potential customers who wouldn't be real customers because they didn't sell to the IT department. But if you're an IT staffing firm, if you are an information security firm, if you are an application firm, there are all sorts of different types of companies that sold to the IT department. And we went out and built manually a great data asset of the people who made decisions in IT departments, their phone numbers, their email addresses, information about their companies. And then we made that available to those sales and marketing teams. And so there was instantly great product market fit for two reasons. One, we were like in a niche and we were really focused on that. And then two, I had seen how it worked at the last company that I worked at. And so I knew there was a meaningful amount of demand to go get.
I want to ask another like follow-up question to this is like, how did you know that you would be the founder for this? Like, what did you identify as your like unfair advantage before you kind of like went in?
So, this is actually like a compliment to my co-founder. I didn't know. my co-founder called me 3 weeks before my first year law school finals. And your first year in law school is your hardest year. Second and third year are much easier, but first year is pretty cutthroat. And he called me and said, hey, I want to start something that's like the company that we used to work at, but I don't want to directly compete with them. And I have no idea how to do it. And you really know how to do it. And I couldn't do it without you. So will you do it with me? And I thought it was just like a harebrained idea of his. And so I said, like, look, I'm in the middle of finals. Call me in 3 weeks. If you still want to do it in 3 weeks, we can talk about it. So he called me and I was like, there's no way he's calling me in 3 weeks. And he called me in 3 weeks that I'm still interested. Like, I was like, all right, look, I could probably put in, I don't know, 10 hours a week to helping you do this. And he was like, however many hours you want to put in, I want to be 50-50 partners. That's the way I want it to work. So then I was like, okay, well, if you quit your job and move to Columbus, Ohio, then I'll consider doing this with you. And he was like, okay, I'll quit my job and move to Columbus, Ohio. So he quit his job and moved to Columbus, Ohio, and then we started the company together. And I think like it was more him believing that that I needed to be a founder of this business for it to be successful. I had a lot of experience because I had worked 5 years in a SaaS company in a similar space. And so I knew how to get the business to 5 million in revenue because I had seen it done and I knew what it would take to get to 5 million. Beyond that, I had to figure it out.
How would you get it? I think that's I profile, right? Like, so how do you get it to 5 million in revenue at the beginning?
It was like,
where did you guys get the information of these people?
We did online research to pick up, like, sometimes there would be an annual report or a company's leadership page that had the chief information officer. And then we would start there and then we would call into companies. So we would call company. That's where we spent, both of us spent kind of like 5 to 8 hours of our day calling into companies to try to figure out who reports to who and who else is in the IT department and who did they report to and what was their phone number, what's the email formula. And so we had a bunch of conversations all around the business, the same thing that a seller would do, but we were doing it account by account and then building out really great profiles. And so we started, like, we built this great profile on Vail Resorts. We built a great profile on Quicken Loans. We built a great profile on Starbucks. And then we took those profiles and we sent them out to sales leaders and marketing leaders. And we said, like, wouldn't this help you sell into these accounts? So it was all email marketing in the early days, probably through like 25 million in revenue. It was primarily email marketing that led to hand raisers. And then we had a team that followed up with them.
Can you talk about like your first close? Like, how can you close the first client from the freemium model? Like, you call Starbucks and then understand the org chart and then wrote down the email and then send it to these guys. Like, who was the first guy you sent to? I mean, probably no, we probably shouldn't say the exact guy's name, but like,
no, we could say it. The guy's name's Jerry Jewell. He worked at a company called Comsys. Comsys was a publicly traded IT staffing company. And they saw the data and they said, yeah, okay, definitely can get value out of this. The problem was, at the time, we had like data on 1,000 companies and like 10,000 people at those companies. And he was like, look, this is really great data, but it doesn't really cover everybody that we would want to sell to. So, so we said, okay, no problem. What we'll do is we'll take these, you get access to ZoomInfo. That costs $8,500. And then for another $7,000, we'll go out and build for you the next 500 accounts you want, or the next 1,000 accounts. I can't remember what the number was, but we will go custom build for you the next 1,000 accounts. And we'll make that available inside of ZoomInfo for you. And that was our first contract. And I remember being home for Christmas break from law school and like calling up the procurement department at Comsys and being like, hey, like, are you going to pay us? Like, the contract is, are you going to sign the contract? Or are you going to pay us? And then that was our first deal that we closed right at the end of 2007. So we kind of kicked off in May of 2007. I actually just passed my 18-year anniversary at ZoomInfo. So ZoomInfo is officially an adult. And we closed the first deal at the end of that year.
That's amazing. So I feel like the other part is like, I feel like just having the belief of like it will pan out. Like when you're like cold calling these people, that's like very kind of important, because I think a lot of people probably would just quit after like 3 calls. But because of like it's really easy to be like, okay, there's no way I'm gonna scrape the internet and then like call 1,000 customers. But it seems like this is like could be done.
Yeah, look, I think the hit rate is not high, but you didn't need like a high hit rate to build really great profiles. And so you'd get like, if you got 1 out of 5, that was pretty good, because you could build like, you could, if you went after the Fortune 2000, you would end up with a lot of really good profiles on the Fortune 2000, even if you had a 1 in 5 hit rate. So that was fine. We knew we had to take a lot of swings to get like really good data. And then on the outbound side, it was actually like fairly easy back then to get responses to the emails. We had a really unique offering. That really unique offering really resonated with the buyers we were reaching out to. And so the response rate was really high. I'll tell you a fun problem that I ran into. There wasn't like marketing automation or sales automation tools then. We were just kind of sending out from our domain, whatever domain we had. And you would get throttled. You'd get stuck at like, 1,000 emails a day. And I figured out how to use the Ohio State SMTP relay, the relay to send emails, to send out tens of thousands of emails from ZoomInfo out to our prospect customers using my Ohio State, like not my email, but access to their email sender. And so I'd go to the law library every day and I'd run a program that used the SMTP relay at Ohio State to send out thousands and thousands of emails. And look, like you just figure out how to make things work when you're a small company and you're like hustling, and there is just the answer can't be you can't do it. The answer is always like, you got to go figure out how to do it. Even today, like at ZoomInfo, oftentimes I'll come into a conversation and I'll hear all the reasons why something is hard to do or not possible to do or has a lot of risk to doing. And I show up and I'm like, tell me how you're going to do it. Like, I understand those things are hard. Now, how are we going to do it? And a lot of times, like as companies get bigger, people do a lot to flag risk and they don't do a lot to figure out the way through that risk. And so I've done a lot. I try really hard at ZoomInfo to like make sure that people are seeing through the risk that they're identifying so that they can get to the other side of it.
I want to ask a few questions about like scaling the company, right? I feel like one of your biggest strengths is like, I think you talk about this on like another podcast that like, when like your company was like, being, I guess, like bought, or like, I guess like people on the board were trying to change to like another, like trying to hire another CEO, and then that deal didn't really go through, and then you went with another person. And then I feel like those are, and then like, I feel like one of your biggest strengths is you survive from like the, at the beginning as like the founder to now you're like a public CEO. That's like, it takes a lot of different, I guess, like re-innovation of yourself. From like a personal level, like how do you separate yourself from like the, from 0 to 1 founder to now like a public company CEO? I guess like how did you kind of like, maybe let's say separate them into 3 different career bracket? Like what are some core lessons that you've learned from each one? And then we can talk about other stuff. Like I wrote down a bunch of stuff about it.
So look, I think 0 to 1 or whatever, it was 0 to 5 million is really just about like hustle and grit and figuring out how to get things done when you have no resources to get anything done. Then also, that period also instilled fiscal discipline because there was no money. And so you had to figure out how to do things in the most efficient way. And so you were also like vigilant about your time. And so you had to make sure that every second you were spending had a ROI that was meaningful against the time you were spending, because you only had your time and a very limited amount of funds to grow the business. And so 0 to 5 is just like hustle, grit, figure your way through. And actually, I would tell you it's like, okay, 0 to 5 is right. Then 5 to 25 was about taking the things that made ZoomInfo great and then starting to scale them out and delegate them to different people. And so I did all of the sales early on. And so like, how do I take what I know about doing sales in the business and how do I scale that now to 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 other salespeople? And so like, I wrote a sales training book. I started recruiting salespeople. Where do I find them? I can't pay them a lot of money. They all have to be like pretty green. And so where am I going to find those people? Where am I going to recruit from? Who am I looking for when they come in? Like, how do I train them? When do I put them on calls? And so really like that was a process of like building out. How do I now scale out the things that I'm doing would be like 5 to 25. And then I would say 25 to 100 was really about, okay, you're doing all of these things. How do you use data to understand the rhythm and the happenings in your business? And so like, what is the data telling me week to week that I can go optimize against? What is the data telling me about retention and our SDR team? And what's the data telling me about new customers and where they're coming from and what ACV is for each new customer? And what is it telling me about productivity of each of my sales reps? And how am I optimizing the productivity of each of my sales reps? And so the next phase was really about how do I build data to be able to run and dashboards to be able to run the business in a data metric focused way. That was that next phase. And then we did an acquisition at around 100, about 120 million in revenue, where the company went from 500 employees to 1,000 employees. That was probably the biggest like set of learning I had to make, because the nice thing about ZoomInfo is that it was pretty steady growth throughout the years. There wasn't like a period where I went from like 25 million to 100 million in 1 year, but I had we were growing kind of 40% every year. And so that gave me time to like grow into the new leadership responsibilities. But when you do M&A that doubles your business and you go from 500 to 1,000, like there's a whole different set of things you need to be doing at 1,000 employees that you weren't doing at 500 employees. And I would have had 2-3 years to figure that out. And instead I had to figure it out like within a couple of months. And that was a lot about, team, and I needed a great HR leader, and I needed to communicate with the company in a much different way than I was historically communicating with the company. And I had leaders across the business that now like I had much less interaction with than the leaders I had when we had 500 employees. I was seeing them all the time, and now I was bi-coastal. So I had 500 people in Portland, Oregon, and 500 people in Boston, and I had 100 people in Israel. And so how do you like manage a more dispersed team? And so there were a lot of learnings there. And then we went public when we were out about, called 350 million in revenue.
I have so many questions there. So like one thing is like, it seems like I feel like you're a very go-to-market slash like sales revenue driven leader. Like what do you think about leveraging the newest technology? So right now we have AI, right? But like I guess like one part of like this is like a really selfish question is like I think can you talk about like how do you become a technical leader when your background is more of like legal or sales or operation related, and how do you gain the confidence to like actually run a tech business in general, tech or data business in general, and how do you like yeah, I feel like the install your own confidence is like very important based
Yeah,
off.
yeah, yeah. Look, there are areas of the business that I understand deeply, and then there are areas of the business that I'm not a subject matter expert on. Um, and so, if we're talking about data, sales, if I'm having a legal conversation, retention, those are areas where, like, I've done the job, and so I understand them deeply. And so I can be a really great partner in those areas. I'm also going to be really tough to bamboozle in those areas too. And so, like, the level of knowledge that I expect you to have is like pretty high. And then if I go over into engineering land, I'm not, and I've never coded. I've done, I think every job at ZoomInfo, except I've never like actually committed code to the platform. So when I'm over there, I have to have leaders that I really trust, that I'm super aligned with, that I'm constantly getting updates from, that are aligned from a velocity perspective with me and from a priorities perspective with me. And so like leadership matters in all of the roles, but alignment really matters when you're working in areas that you don't have like expertise in. And I've seen enough in engineering, so I have experience managing an engineering function now. But I'm still not, I'm never going to be a subject matter expert in how to architect an enterprise platform. I have to have really great people for that.
I wonder, so this is like a very specific question. At the beginning, how do you think about pricing? Do you think you should go higher than the competitor or like lower to gain more customer? Like, how do you think about that in general as a category?
Yeah, I think I'm not sure how much I thought about being higher or lower than my competitors. I think I thought a lot about fairly pricing the offering, but being flexible with different size companies. And so if I was selling to an an upcoming SMB company, I was always okay with being more flexible with pricing around those types of companies than if I was talking to Google, or some publicly traded company. I would be like more specific about the pricing, or more prescriptive about the pricing. So like set a price that you think is fair, and then be flexible when you're in different segments of the market.
How do you think about, I guess, like if people just take your information and resell on other platform?
Oh, how do I feel about that?
No, not how do you feel about it? How do you like kind of like protect your own like company information, or like maybe protect is not the right word because like, they could be your actual client, but what if like people resell this? How
Yeah,
do you kind of like protect the company business model and like all the
totally. So first, like, look, all of our contracts say that you can't take the data and create a competitive solution or create a derivative product from it. We do a bunch of stuff from a security perspective within the product to make sure that we track the data. Like if you take our data and put it in your CRM, we don't care. If you take the data and it goes into your buddy's CRM who's not a customer of ZoomInfo's, like we do care about that. And so we built a bunch of stuff in the platform to make sure that customers who pay for ZoomInfo are the only customers who can get value out of ZoomInfo. But like I think the subscription economy is, people shared freely their Netflix usernames and passwords until maybe a year and a half ago or 2 years ago when Netflix started cracking down on this. And so I think largely people believed it was okay to share their subscriptions. And I think more and more today, they realize like, no, this is specific to you. So along the way, we've done a lot to protect our data, make sure it doesn't go to the wrong places, and make sure our customers who pay for ZoomInfo are the ones who get value from ZoomInfo. And somebody can't just borrow their buddy's subscription that their company paid for and get value that they didn't pay for.
I wonder, okay, so going back to running the business part, so like when, like you guys have made 11 acquisitions, and what would you say were the strategic decision based off what, I guess like when you're like acquiring a company, how do you think about what company to acquire and then what is the ideal ROI? And then you mentioned to this too, like on the SaaS podcast that like, all of these businesses are profitable, but they're not running as efficiently as ZoomInfo. And then after you acquire them, how do you kind of ensemble them or like incorporate them into your existing group?
Yeah, so it's a big question. So and actually it changes based on like the strategic direction of the company. But we have a good sense for our product roadmap for the next year. Mm-hmm. If there are places where we can accelerate the product roadmap, mm-hmm. we're going to look at opportunities there. I think the big things about making acquisitions, particularly ones that are not like tuck-ins that accelerate a product roadmap, but instead are designed to be revenue generative inside of the business, look, I want to find products or solutions that sell to the same buyer that we sell to, because I want to be able to leverage our go-to-market team to be able to take those products to market. And so if I go out and buy, if my customers are VPs of sales, VPs of marketing, chief revenue officers, chief marketing officers, heads of rev ops, if I go out and buy something that sells to the information technology department, I'm not going to get as much lift out of the 1,000+ salespeople I have, because we won't be selling to the same people. And so I want to make sure that when we're acquiring businesses, products that we expect to accelerate using our go-to-market organization, that the buyers of those products are the same buyers of core ZoomInfo. I think that's first. Second, I want to stay really close to what we offer. So like there are a lot of solutions for marketers and salespeople. We're really focused on leveraging data to help companies go to market more efficiently, to be in front of the right people at the right times. And so like if there are data assets we can acquire, that's like right down the middle. We understand how to collect data. We understand how to integrate data. We understand how to sell data. And so if someone has created a unique way to collect data that would be valuable to our clients, that's a great acquisition for us. We build a whole integration plan from HR, operations, IT, sales. So before the acquisition closes, we know like what we're going to do. We know when we're going to do it. We know when systems are going to come together. We know when territories are going to be merged. We know what teams people are going to report to. We know where there are synergies. And so we know like you don't need two CFOs when you bring two companies together. And so we also are like really good about telling people like, listen, we need you to transition. So it'll be like 3 months, hand it over to us, and then you transition out of the business because we don't need two CFOs or two FP&A people. And so we're on day one, we tell everybody what we're going to do, and then we go do those things. But for weeks in the lead up to that, we're building all of those plans and getting input from the other side and thinking through our own strategies. And so we're like really well aligned by the time we show up and start the integration work.
I think one of the point that you brought up is like really interesting is, the data quality is really important. How do you examine the data quality without, sending out sales email to these companies?
Yeah. I mean, one, we have a network of people in our platform who do send out sales emails. And so we see bounces, deliveries. We see when phone numbers connect. We know when they're not connecting. And so we're using our customers' interactions with the data to cleanse our own data. We have big contributory networks that share data back to us that help us understand the quality of the data. We do our own tests internally. So we have literally 186 different dashboards that we look at that give us a view into a bunch of different areas of quality as it relates to the business and what our customers care about. And then we benchmark against competitors as well. And so we'll look at how our data internationally stacks up to an international player. We look at how our data on IT decision makers stacks up with competition. And we want to be so far ahead of our competition from a data accuracy and coverage perspective that it's just really obvious to anybody who uses ZoomInfo that we are clearly the most accurate with the most coverage.
I wonder, since like I feel like data quality is one important part, the other part about is like I guess the product expansion. So you guys have multiple products. There's like a broader suite of like, sales OS, marketing OS, talent OS.
Right.
I guess like how do you think about as a founder, like, people always say, oh, focus on the core thing. But I guess like what exactly would be the core thing? Because if let's say I feel like the data information or like the sales information market is like kind of very nowadays is kind of like saturated or like it's very there's a lot of company in that space. How do you think about like staying focused versus like branching out to like multiple different product and solutions? And then how do you think about which sub solution would generate the most amount of revenue based off like what you're seeing from running this?
So some of this is just like strategically led. And so, a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, we launched a marketing solution, ZoomInfo Marketing. And we did it for a number of reasons. One, we had a lot of marketers who were using core ZoomInfo to build audiences, to cleanse their marketing automation systems. They were always like 30% of who was buying ZoomInfo. And then we realized, we don't have an interface or reporting or a lot of the actions that marketers want to do with ZoomInfo. And so we should build for them a unique offering that is connected to the ad, to their ability to put out ads, that's connected to their marketing automation system, that let them leverage intent and website identification. And then because we already knew we were talking 30% of our customer base was already marketing, we knew that there was like product market fit there, that we could go like, if you had product market fit on the core thing that you built for salespeople that marketers were buying, then you're certainly going to have product market fit when you custom build something specifically for marketers that's built around their workflow. And the data asset is the same. And so like, okay, I've got a data asset that marketers want. I have to put an application interface over that data, and I have to connect it to different systems and build some additional workflow. But that core data asset can be leveraged on both sides, in sales and in marketing. And so you had that benefit when you went over to the marketing side. When we built talent, it was the same thing. Like we had a bunch of IT staffing firms, not just IT staffing, but staffing firms who use ZoomInfo. And originally, they were using us on their business development side. And so they were using us to go contact people who had open job roles that they could help fill. But over time, they started adding their recruiters to the platform as well. And so you had that same sort of realization, like, okay, recruiters are using ZoomInfo, but it's not really designed for their use case. And I don't want to put a bunch of like recruiting specific stuff into the sales platform to like dilute what salespeople are doing. And then we think there's a big opportunity in talent. Let's go build a unique solution for recruiters and for the talent space. And you're really like evaluating the opportunity, evaluating the difficulty of building something specific around that opportunity. And then you have to, resources matter at any stage of a company. your biggest job as a CEO at any stage, and we touched on this in a different way, but it's resource allocation. I have a limited amount of resources. What am I going to do with those resources? Where am I going to deploy them? I have like $200,000. Am I going to go buy ads? Am I going to do demand gen? Am I going to add a new salesperson? Am I going to add an engineer? Am I going to add a product person? If I add an engineering or a product person, am I going to add them on the core platform? Am I going to add them on a secondary platform? Like, how do you think about allocating those resources? And so you're constantly like balancing and trying to figure out, if I have one extra dollar, what's the highest ROI place I can put that extra dollar?
For sure. I think that's probably one of the hardest questions. It also depends on the employees, right? Like, and then the people. I think you mentioned like, so I was like listening to this other podcast. You were talking about like hiring people. You should take your time to hire people instead of just hire like someone who can quickly do a better job than you, or like who can like all your stuff. That being said, like I feel like for a company to grow at the beginning, you mentioned 0 to 5 million as you and your co-founder. I guess, how would you think about the pricing, and then how do you think about hiring the first person back in time? Now, obviously, it's a really huge company, but so at the beginning, do you hire for like work ethic, or you hire for like the people who kind of knows what's going on? Like, how do you kind of like, what would be the one core thing that you focus on hiring?
For sure, in the early days, I hired for work ethic. We hired a bunch of young people who had something to prove. Actually, like all of my great early hires were people with chips on their shoulder for different reasons. I don't think I looked for that. It is what ended up being things that worked. So my first sales hire was actually two friends from college. One friend from high school, one friend from college, who I knew well and who were willing to work for next to nothing and come to work at ZoomInfo. So those are my first two. My next sales hire was a guy who had been his only job history was he was a caddy. He was a caddy on a golf course. And he lived in the Portland, Oregon area because his wife had gotten a job at Nordstrom. He hadn't found a job yet. And his wife was the breadwinner in the family. Or it wasn't his wife, it was his girlfriend at the time. And he wanted to like prove himself. And so he was like hungry. He would get in early, he stayed late. My second sales hire was a professional poker player. And then they made poker illegal online, and he had no job. And he wanted to be in sales. He showed up in my office in a suit and said, "This is a place I want to work. Like, here's my resume. Like, I know I want to be here." He was very smart. My third sales hire had bounced around a number of sales jobs, but had like a lot of talent and came to ZoomInfo with something to prove. And like that sort of core group really drove the growth of ZoomInfo through 50 million of revenue. They all became senior leaders at the company. And so like, I think work ethic is number one. Then, in a startup at the early stage, I had this moment once where we hired a handful of people, and I told one of the women who worked for me, go do your first meeting on GoToMeeting. Like send them the link, set up the GoToMeeting. And it was like hours later, and I was like, "Did you send out the GoToMeeting link?" And she was like, "No." I was like, "Why not?" She said, "Well, how am I supposed to know how to do that?" I was like, "What do you mean, how are you supposed to know how to do that?" She's like, "Well, nobody trained me. There was no like onboarding for how to use GoToMeeting. Like, I don't know how to use GoToMeeting. Who's going to train me on using GoToMeeting?" And I was like, my first reaction was, just Google how to use GoToMeeting. Like, just Google, how do I use GoToMeeting? And you'll see how to use GoToMeeting. Like, either you can Google it, or I can spend the next hour showing you it, which will be like the same as you Googling it. But like, her last job was at State Farm. It was a big company. There was a formalized training on everything. And so you also have to think about, like, am I hiring people who can figure things out on their own? And are they self-starters who will figure things out on their own. Because in a startup, you don't have time to teach somebody how to use GoToMeeting or whatever it is. People have to be able to figure things out on their own. And so then, we were really focused on making sure that we hired people with high aptitude who were self-starters. But look, there's no silver bullet in hiring. Everybody makes mistakes on this, and people make mistakes all the way through their journeys. They still make mistakes. And so you want to be 50 to 60% good. You want to be better than you are bad. You will still make mistakes. The best lesson is take your time, because what ends up happening, and I talked about this before, but what ends up happening is you're 20 interviews deep. You have a bunch of misgivings about the person you might hire, but they're the best person of the 20 people you've interviewed for the last 5 months, and you've just had it. And you're like, this person is the best one I've seen. Maybe the talent market for this role is actually not that good. Da 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 da. And then you make a hire, and all of those things that you were worried about actually come to fruition. And so you just have to give yourself time. You just have to be okay with searches taking a long time. If sometimes you'll find the right person in the second interview, but if you don't, you just have to be patient and not let yourself hire somebody that you have fear and misgivings about.
I wonder, since we talked about hiring, but the other big component these days we briefly touch upon is AI. So you envision a future with I guess the future of sales is you said, it's every sales rep will pair with a one-on-one AI driven SDR. And I wonder, how do you foresee AI changing the future of sales? I feel AI SDR is probably one of the most popular things Silicon Valley people have ever built these days. How do you think about what are something that could be done by AI, and then how would you personally leverage AI to sell something, and what are something that you still feel human should be emphasizing on or training your skill on as a salesperson?
Look, I think first of all, there's just no excuse for not deeply knowing your customer in the age of AI. AI does a ton of research for you about the customer. It should have access to all of your calls, all of your emails. It should know how you've interacted with them, what they care about, what they don't care about. And then it should know your business and be able to suggest the things that you talk to your customer about. And so if you're a sales rep today and you're going into a call and you're not using a prompt that you've built that gives you terrific insights about the company and what you should be talking about, you're already way behind. And if sales reps are showing up, your competition is going to show up having leveraged AI to really understand a company's business and then show up with insights. And so I think it's totally inexcusable in today's day and age to not know your customer deeply, because AI will speed up that research process, 20, 30x. I think that's one area. I think when you think about what an AI SDR or a Copilot will do for you, it's if I go to an SDR today and I say, hey, I want to call this group of customers and I want to pitch them this solution that we have. When they go to the call, they'll know a little bit about the customer, they'll know a little bit about the product, and then they'll show up and try to get the appointment. I think the knowledge power of AI there, if I give that to an AI SDR, that AI SDR will know everything about the company and everything about the solution, and will be able to more cohesively talk about the solutions with the customer. And so the leveraging of knowledge that you're able to get with AI in any of these instances is pretty tremendous. And then, look, I think if you go back to what all of our jobs are, which is to allocate resources in the most efficient way possible, we spend a good amount of time trying to think through what's our total addressable market, what's our serviceable market, and then how do I prioritize accounts within that market to put my best resources at the best opportunities. And you used to do that with like weird scoring or models, and AI is way better at understanding signals that a company is showing, your ICP, and then being able to prioritize those accounts for you to engage with. Like every seller should be sitting down every morning with an AI prioritized list of accounts and contacts that they should be engaging with, and with insightful messaging to reach out to them with that the AI has built, because they know your company, they know the prospect, they know all the context around the account.
For sure. I wonder, like another general question is like, I guess like, how do you think about building up a moat for your business? Would it be speed? Because nowadays with AI, like, one of the top investors have said that like every company could be copied just within 6 months. And so basically your advantage is like 6 months before the competitors.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, obviously I feel like ZoomInfo is like a really big business now. Like it's a lot harder to like, be, copied, but I guess like, but as a business on its own, like how would you think about the building a moat or a competitive edge for your business?
Look, I think there are a couple ways. One, if you're collecting data and data that's not publicly available, if you create unique ways to collect that data, and you build like a contributory network where there's a give to get, and you're out there collecting data from a diverse set of people, and that data is not available to the LLMs because it's proprietary, collected in a unique way, and there's a flywheel or network effect around that, that's a pretty good moat. It's not impenetrable, but it's a pretty good moat. And then, look, I think if most companies are going to boil down to two things, right? Speed, but speed has to come with domain expertise. And so like I can build very fast. I'm high velocity in the way that I can get new products and solutions out, but that I'm married to a product thinker who deeply understands the domain that we're operating in, deeply understands the problems that our end users are having, and has a unique point of view on how to solve those. If you're just building a bunch of random stuff really fast, that doesn't really get you anywhere. And so you need that domain expertise to make sure you're building end-to-end solutions that actually solve your end customers' use cases.
I love that. So like one is like end-to-end solution, one is like a unique way to solve the core problem, basically. That's what
Yeah.
you're saying. Another question is like bootstrap versus venture funding. Because I feel like you're in like such a unique position to talk about it, because nowadays like I feel like when like a person thinking about, like I feel like we're in like a really interesting era, because at the beginning, like maybe 3 months before, every person in Silicon Valley is like trying to raise from VC at all time. But in the past 3 months, I've seen a lot of people just want to like bootstrap their own business, or maybe seed strapping, like they just raise one round and then just build. How do you think about bootstrap versus raising VC money?
Look, I think there are probably a number of businesses where they need VC funding to do whatever they're going to do. If you think that like there's like a high capital cost to getting into a space, if you think that what you said, like in 6 months, somebody can show up and copy you, maybe you want to take VC funding to get way out ahead of that. And then otherwise, I think the longer you can go in a bootstrapped or seed strapped way is the right thing to do for maintaining control and making really disciplined decisions. Like when you're bootstrapping and you don't have a lot of money, you're making very disciplined decisions, and that DNA just doesn't go away. Like once you have that disciplined decision-making DNA in your business, it lasts. It's a lasting discipline. And so I think one of the real great benefits of not being flush with money on the first day is that you have to make like really good decisions about deploying capital. And then that makes you a better leader and a better manager than if you were just kind of like flush with money and running.
Mm. Let's talk about profit margin. So like, I mean, first of all, like I really like your what you said about like like disciplined decision making, because of, like at the beginning, like, you know, since you're a bootstrap company, like you have you have to like really build that culture from the very beginning. So thinking about profit margin, so I believe you're like, you know, you guys are at like 35% adjusted EBITDA margin. So I heard that like, so well, I chat about this with my husband. So my husband were like, so basically I think as a bootstrap founder myself, like he said like you have to have 50% profit margin at the very beginning to like actually build a successful business like that lasts generations. But I guess like compared to the beginning profit margin to like nowadays, since like I guess ZoomInfo is like such a huge company, how do you think about the profit margin shifts, and where would you kind of like splurge on to like grow the business, and then where would you kind of like shrink to make sure that you're in like a healthy growth?
Yeah, look, there are times in the growth of your business where you see a big opportunity, you recognize that you're early to it, and you want to go after that opportunity really quickly, and the opportunity just needs more capital. And so if you're a high margin business, you have the opportunity to take margins down in those instances and then invest in the areas that you're going to see that you have conviction you're going to see real growth on. And then there are times in the business where like things are going and there isn't like the obvious next place to put those dollars. And so you can maintain profit margin there. You know, we're doing a share buyback today. And so like we believe that we should use our free cash flow to buy back, to do M&A on the most attractive company we see out in the marketplace, which is ourselves. And so we're using our free cash flow to go buy back shares of ZoomInfo stock. We think that's a good use of capital right now. And then, but like a year from now, you know, we would also reevaluate that and say, maybe right now, the best use of that cash is to go do M&A, or maybe right now the best use of that cash is to go invest behind go-to-market studio because it's off to the races and we see a really big opportunity to go win there. And maybe our window is open for a limited moment and we want to make sure that we capture as much market share in that moment as possible. And so we'll go, there have been times where we've taken margins down. There have been times where we've taken margins up. When you're thinking about that across your organization, it's the same resource allocation decision. Where am I getting the most ROI on the dollars that I'm spending in the business? And where am I getting the least ROI on the dollars that I'm spending in the business? And if I want to adjust margins, I'm going to go look at the areas that I'm getting the least return on the dollars that I'm spending. And I'm going to get rid of those areas first. I mean, I'm not going to go to the areas that are returning me the highest dollars on my investment. I'm going to go to the areas that return me the least.
I wonder, so from a client acquisition perspective, I guess like how do you think about building a clientele that's like, I guess, unstoppable? Because I think a lot of the startups were targeting, let's say, like the logo shopping at the beginning. So like you try to land up like as big logo as possible to, but that problem is like, you know, the smaller company would want to see what's them being served. So like I also noticed that you said about this in another podcast that like, you know, the smaller company want to see like a Forbes article of like their, you know, competitive business or like someone in their kind of domain use ZoomInfo.
Yeah.
How do you think about like, do you go for a big logo first and then, or do you do like smaller company first because they're easier to entry? I guess, how do you think about the sales strategy? And like, because the economy is so volatile, like, you know, I feel like it's always safe to build small and big businesses to, you know, sustain your business. But from a strategic standpoint, at the very beginning, would you go for big or small?
Look, as you move up, sales cycles get longer. And so like if you are bootstrapped in the early days, you probably don't have a lot of money to spend on a 18-month sales cycle for a large Fortune 500 company. And you probably also don't have the privacy, security, certifications that you need to sell your product or your solution into a really large company anyways. And so I think there is like a place where things get more complicated to sell that you probably want to stay away from as like as your key channel when you're starting your business. And then even today, like it's much easier to sell a deal to a company between 10 and 500 employees than it is to sell to a company that has 10,000 or more employees. And so you want to figure out where you're most optimized, where ACV is the highest for how long the sales cycle is. There is a sweet spot where like, oh, I'm at a 100 employee company. ACV is 3x what a 10 person company is. And sales cycle is only 1.5x. Great. I'm going to spend a bunch of time up there. And the market is big. And so I would be balancing ACV with sales cycle length and trying to find the sweet spot.
Totally. Okay. I want to be mindful of the time. So we'll wrap with a 1 minute fire round for you.
Okay.
What's your favorite book?
What's my favorite book? Like a business book or fun book?
It's your book choice. Maybe both.
Okay, I'll give you just both. My favorite business book is The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. And then my favorite personal book is a book called Playing for Pizza that was written by John Grisham.
Oh, wow. I love the
It's like an off-genre John Grisham book.
Wow. Who made the biggest impact in your career?
Biggest impact in my career. I mean, biggest impact in my career. I would just say I'm super loyal to the people who helped me build the business in the early days. And so that core group of sales people who came in on day one and, gave me their blood, sweat, and tears for a decade or more. I have a tremendous amount of like loyalty and respect for them. So they definitely made my career for sure.
Love. Who is your personal board of advisors when you're running your business?
My personal board of advisors would be my wife. I talk to my wife all the time about the business. And then I was on a board of a company called Tegus. Which was a smaller data company that sold for about $1 billion to AlphaSense. And the CEO of that company, there's two CEOs, brothers. But one of the CEOs, Mike Elnick, I talk to all the time, has been a great personal friend and advisor for me.
Who would you invite to a dinner party?
Dead or alive?
It's your party.
Jesus.
Where can we find you outside of work?
Not many places. If I'm not at work, I'm at home or spending time with my 9-year-old daughter, Grace, and my wife, Jessica. That's like I have time for myself, ZoomInfo, and my family, and that's about it.
Amazing. Wow, Henry, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was such a fun conversation. You're such a master at GTM.
Thanks so much for having me, Grace. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you. Let me quickly